Good afternoon. This hearing session is now open. It forms part of the examination of the Merton local plan. My name is RJ Aston, and along with my colleague GJ Fort, we are the inspectors appointed by the Secretary of State to conduct the examination and to report to the Council in due course. The format of the hearing is a structured and focused discussion that we shall lead. Now, there are some preliminary matters and a bit of housekeeping. Could I have some introductions first, please, from the Council?
Tara Butler, Merton Council.
Thank you.
Even from the Estates and Merton Council.
Anne-Maria Clark, Merton Council.
Thank you. And from around the table, please, Mr. Burton.
Hi, it's Tony Burton. I'm Secretary of Mitcham Cricket Green Community and Heritage.
Welcome back.
Adrian Fox on behalf of Aviva Investors.
Tony Michael, Wimbledon Society.
For the examination is Carmel Edwards, who should be the main point of contact prior to and after the hearing, and should all be copied into all correspondence. That would be a good time to switch off phones or at least turn them to silent. And I'd be grateful if Ms. Butler could indicate the procedures in the event of a fire, whether any tests are due, and advise participants of the location of facilities, please.
Fully accessible toilets are available in this building at ground level, just by the stairs, and there's a lift outside to take people down as well. There's a drinking water dispenser downstairs as well. If you can't see it, ask the security guards. There are no fire drills scheduled during the hearing hours today. If the fire alarm sounds either intermittently or continuously, please leave the building immediately by the nearest fire exit without stopping to collect belongings. Staff will direct you to the exits and fire assembly point. If you're unable to use the stairs, a member of staff will assist you. There's an induction loop system in this chamber for people with hearing difficulties. And finally, there is free Wi-Fi by registering for Merton Guest Wi-Fi.
Thank you. The hearings are being filmed and live streamed to YouTube. Is everyone present comfortable with this? The matters to be discussed today, apologies, does anyone else intend to film or record? I don't think so, but I have to ask that question. The matters to be discussed today will be focused questions based upon and taking forward the MIQs and the associated written statements received. Inspector Fort and I are tasked with considering the soundness of the plan in accordance with the criteria of the National Planning Policy Framework and also whether it is legally compliant. The hearings are intended to assist us in those regards. In submitting the plan, the Council considers it is sound and is the starting point for the examination. So if you're challenging the soundness of the plan, then you have to explain why and what changes may be necessary. That would make it sound. We have read and will consider the hearing statements that have been prepared and also the original representations that were made. There is no need for these to be repeated. Instead, our aim is that the discussion moves forward from these documents and deals with specific questions that we have or areas where further clarification or explanation are required. At times, we may ask for a more general contribution or a summary of your position. When contributing to discussions, it would be very helpful to Inspector Fort and I if contributors would stick to the matter in hand and refrain from commenting on unrelated matters. Now, in order to test the plan for soundness and legal compliance, Inspector Fort and I will need to ask some questions. You will have seen that we have already been doing this in preliminary questions and correspondence with the Council, in the published MIQ document, and both the Council and other participants have responded to these. The questions will continue today based on those responses. However, anything that is asked should not be taken as demonstrating a particular predisposition on our part. We will normally start a particular topic by asking the Council for responses to questions we have before indicating that we wish others to comment. For those of you in the room, if you wish to comment, then please indicate this by turning your nameplate on its side. Don't think we have anyone on Zoom this afternoon. So I'll dispense with the instructions if you are on Zoom. We may also invite contributions from you on specific points where we think this may assist the examination. And in speaking during the hearing, we would request that you are concise and specific. In particular, if you wish to highlight certain parts of your statement or other documents that form part of the examination, then it'll be helpful to us if you can provide the reference. Those present in the room should use the microphones when speaking to us, and please ensure that they're positioned close to you when speaking so that both those in the room, normally anyone who's appearing virtually, but we don't have them, can obviously help understand what you are saying. Moving on, it's open to the council to propose further changes to the plan, and we would ask that they keep a record of possible changes that arise during our discussions. Any changes that would constitute main modifications would be subject to further consultation. However, no further representations or evidence will be accepted after the hearing sessions are finished, unless we specifically request otherwise. Moreover, we are not expecting any further written submissions during the course of the hearing sessions, but we may request further material should discussions indicate that would be useful. There'll be a short session at the end of each sitting day to ensure that any suggested modifications or additional items, such as topic papers or other evidence that we might request or have been suggested during the course of discussions, have been adequately recorded. Are there any questions at this stage about the procedural aspects of the hearing? No? Okay. In that case then, we will now move on to matter 10. And as ever, to open this discussion, we invite the council's general response as to whether the plan's approaches to employment uses, town centres and the opportunity area are justified, consistent with national policy and in general conformity with the London Plan. Ms Butler, over to you, please.
Thank you, Inspector. Matter 10 focuses on the council's approach to employment uses, town centres and the Wimbledon, South Wimbledon, Colliers Wood opportunity area. It's the council's view that the plan, along with the proposed modifications put forward, sets out a justified approach to employment, town centres and the opportunity area, one which is consistent with national policy and is also in general conformity with the London Plan. The council's town centres and high streets are vital to the social and economic fabric and environmental fabric of the borough, and their success and attractiveness is important to both residents and businesses. Merton's designated strategic industrial locations are vital for businesses that require 24-hour operations or conduct other business activities that are not compatible with more sensitive uses. Local Plan Policy EC 13.1, promoting economic growth and successful high streets, sets the strategic direction for the borough's economic and town centres policies in the local plan. Merton's local plan proposes 1 major centre, 3 district centres and 6 local centres, as set out within policy TC 13.5. Their boundaries are clearly illustrated on the policies map, which is document OD2, and they're also referred to in the area-specific policies N1 to N9 in the local plan. Merton's strategic industrial locations and locally significant industrial sites are also included in the policies map, document OD2, and the strategic industrial locations are listed in policy EC 13.2. The London Plan policy SD1, opportunity areas, includes an opportunity area for Merton called Wimbledon, South Wimbledon and Colliers Wood as one of London's opportunity areas. And the London Plan contains indicative targets for homes and jobs for that opportunity area. Merton's local plan proposes the boundary for this opportunity area, which is on the policies map, summarised in chapter 01B, the Good Growth Strategy, and which also contains a small map, and referenced in policy N3.1 Colliers Wood and elsewhere in the plan where relevant. Council in its local plan is proposing 3 changes to the town centres and industrial land designations in this local plan compared to previous local plans. The changes are the elevation of Colliers Wood to district centre status, the creation of a new local centre at South Wimbledon, and the removal of half of Hallowfield Way strategic industrial location in accordance with site allocation MI1 and in conjunction with proposals in the South London Waste Plan. Policies EC 13.1 to 4 and TC 13.5 to 9 clearly set out the Council's intentions to promote vital and viable town centres, taking a positive approach to their growth, management and adaptation. As Merton is part of London's wider economy, the Council works closely with the Greater London Authority in assessing economic circumstances and in future forecasting. The London Plan 2021, document OD 32 in the examination library, sets many of the strategic parameters and indeed some of the details relating to the economy and town centres for every London borough. This includes the designation of major and district centres, which is in London Plan Policy SD 8 and listed in Annex 1, and list of the strategic industrial locations, London Plan Policy E5. Merton's local economic and town centres evidence is contained in LBM01, Economy and Town Centres topic paper, and LBM01A and LBM01B, Economic Evidence on Offices and Industry. The Council monitors the economic changes that take place across the borough through a range of measures, including reviews of planning applications and development, and also shopping surveys to take account of both changes that come through the planning system, but also the increased flexibility offered by permitted development and other methods that don't require recourse to a local plan. In conclusion, the Council considers that the plan's approach to the economy, town centres, industrial areas, and the Wimbledon, South Wimbledon and Colliers Wood opportunity area is based on proportionate and up-to-date evidence and is in accordance with national policy and general conformity with the London Plan.
Thank you, Ms. Whitman. We're going to take the issues in a slightly different order to how they were given in the published MIQs document. And we're going to start with town centres, and then we're going to move on to industrial and employment uses, and finally focusing on the plan's approach to the opportunity area. Ms. Butler, taking town and district centres first, could you please outline how these have been identified and the justification for the boundaries, both of the centres themselves and the primary shopping areas, please? And just to clarify, those questions are just to deal with issue 3, questions 1 to 3, town and district centres and boundaries.
Thank you, Inspector. As mentioned in the introduction, the London Plan has a significant role in town centre policy, strategic policy, but also in helping boroughs to identify specific town centres at specific levels. So, for example, Annex 1 of the London Plan identifies the list of metropolitan, major and district centres for the whole of London, including Merton. And all boroughs work really closely with the GLA on creating a London Plan and on providing the evidence for those kind of centres. So that one of the starting points is to look at the London Plan and to make sure that we're in accordance in general conformity with it, and also to work with the GLA if we feel that there is a town centre that maybe should be on that list that isn't. So in the case of Merton, that town centre is Colliers Wood, which is listed in the Annex, not Annex 1, but actually I think it is Annex 1, hang on a moment, of the London Plan, but is unclassified as a district centre. Now, we've worked with the GLA for many years, and in both Merton's adopted core planning strategy 2011 and now in this local plan, we believe that there's evidence that Colliers Wood is able to become a district centre. And the criteria for that are also located in the annexes for the London Plan. They are in Annex 1, and there's a list of criteria which talk about sizes and scales for district and major centres. Page page 467 of the London Plan. It goes through what typifies town centres, the square meterage, what kind of services they provide, etc. What Merton does is they survey all of our town centres, we survey all of our town centres, including local centres which aren't part of the London Plan, and look at both qualitative and quantitative data, appetite for change, appetite for demand. We take representations made on the local plan into account, and we allocate the town centres accordingly. And this is sort of brought together in LBMO 1A. That deals with the allocation of major centres. The only one in Merton is Wimbledon. District centres, Mitcham and Morden, and intending to be Collier's Wood, and the local centres, which we're also intending to add South Wimbledon to. Inspector, there was a second part of your question that I'm afraid I think I've missed.
That's fine. It was the first part which you've answered. The justification for the boundaries, both of the centres themselves and primary shopping areas, was the second part.
As I mentioned, the council conducts surveys of change, I suppose, in Merton. This specifically really is something we summarise as a shopping survey, which means we go out and look at commercial premises, what they're being used for, the change that's happening. And we have data dating back more than a decade for this, which helps inform what is happening. Recently, that's become even more important because of the flexibility afforded by both prior approval and permitted development, where changes in and around non-residential can take, in particular, can take place without the need for planning permission. So we look at the changes over time and how people use the town centres as well. And we compare it with what's actually happening. And that's how we choose the town centre boundaries.
How regular are those surveys, Ms. Whittle?
Sorry, I didn't quite catch that.
How regular are those surveys? Or
Annually.
not?
We're due
Annually.
to do this one in this coming summer.
Were you going to add anything else, or no?
Sorry, no.
Are there any responses or views on these matters from around the table, please? No? Okay. Mr. Burton.
I mean, if the question's around our confidence in the definitions of the boundaries, then our view is that Mitcham's boundaries, I mean, Mitcham itself is, in our view, not effectively defined within the plan because we view it as a village, not a town. And we believe that's consistent with the recognition in the London Plan of Mitcham as a district centre, not a town centre. Just as places like Cheam Village and Carshalton Village are recognised, Mitcham should be recognised as a village. And then in terms of the actual boundary, our view is it's unduly tightly drawn and it doesn't reflect the character and history of Mitcham, where the civic and the commercial functions have historically been associated with the upper green and the lower green. And that needs to be embraced in the geographical boundary that's defined for it in the plan. And we've made suggestions as to how we think that can be done in our evidence. And we believe that's consistent with this notion of the 20-minute neighbourhood, which is one that we support in terms of a broad sort of guide to the scale of what's required.
Do you want to just briefly outline for the hearing what those proposals are? And secondly, Mr. Burton, I'll just tack on a question, if I may, to the end of that, just in relation to your comment about the village, and I'll just ask for your view on the significance of that in planning terms.
So on Mitcham as a village, I think it's a really important signal, which is material to decisions as to the nature and kind of development that's appropriate to be reinforcing the village character, which we believe is clearly expressed in the material that's available in support of the plan. And the plan should be providing leadership on that, in providing advance steers to prospective developers as to the context within which they should be bringing forward their proposals.
Was it identified, am I correct in saying it was identified as a village in the character study?
It was identified as a village in that the proposals were supported as a village. The name was changed, not least in response to conversations that we had with the council in the character study. Councillors agreed at the appropriate committee that the character study should recognise that. That has not flowed through into the document that we've seen presented. And fundamentally, it doesn't unpick this definition as being a district centre. So it doesn't go to the sort of the fundamentals of the London Plan definition for Mitcham. It's not, so the consequences aren't profound, but they are important in terms of the context they're setting for development in the area. On the first point, so definition of the boundary, we actually think the council got it about right in the old UDP, when Mitcham was defined as an urban village back in what, oh gosh, can't remember now, 2003, something like that. And we would extend the boundary to approaching Figs Marsh in the north, and beyond Cricket Green. We could have a debate as to how far it extends beyond Cricket Green. In our evidence, we say it could go down to the retail along London Road, so almost getting to Mitcham tram stop. There's a debate to be had about exactly how far down that road it goes, because it becomes quite linear there. But that's the kind of scale of change that we would expand it to include.
Thank you, Mr. Burton. Ms. Butler.
Thank you, Inspector. We have looked closely at this following representations made by Mitcham Cricket Green during the Regulation 18 consultation stage. And as Mr. Burton says, that this isn't really a planning issue. In the London Plan, there isn't a definition of a village. So the annex at the back of the London Plan that I referred to that defines major and metropolitan and local centres, it doesn't really include villages. And Mr. Burton's right, there are words like village stuck to other town centres in London, and that's their name, but it doesn't mean that they're a planning definition per se. Again, in the MPPF, there's no specific definition of a village that must be looked at. And about 20, Mr. Burton's right, about 20 years ago, the council had a local plan that called Mitcham Village. And that lasted for about 10 years. But the current planning system doesn't really have that. I mean, if there is a general groundswell of opinion to call Mitcham Village, that would be taken forward or considered by the council, but I think it's probably under the street naming and numbering functions rather than a planning document. So we don't really have we don't propose to change the name of Mitcham at this time to Mitcham Village as in the planning document. Nor would we expect everybody out there to call it Mitcham District Centre, which is what it's called in planning terms. Just on the borough character study point, I think there was a call to call Mitcham Village. It isn't, the character study just calls it Mitcham. again, it's down to planning definitions versus real life normal speak. So I'm afraid, I suppose, generally we think it's probably not a planning matter.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Michael.
If it helps, we have something called Wimbledon Village, do we not? So already in the borough, there is a supposed village. Would that help? Because what's in the name, does it harm anybody by calling it a village?
Thank you. I think as Miss Butler just confirmed, it's probably an issue more for street naming and numbering or other functions of the council than this local plan. Do you want to say anything?
So, and just picking up Mr. Burton's point on the wide boundary that he's suggested, have you got any views on that as well, Ms. Butler?
Yes, I should have mentioned at first as well is that the primary shopping area is defined in the glossary at the back of the National Plan Policy Framework on page 4. Oops, I'm not sure of what page, but it's at the back of the National Plan Policy Framework. Yes, again, we did look closely at Mitcham Cricket Green's proposals for the wider town centre boundary running from towards Figs Marsh all the way down through Fair Green, down through Cricket Green, and I think it was around about London Road. Mr. Burton had summarised there. And it makes it a very long and very linear, straggly town centre, and it jumps over areas, especially around Cricket Green, where there is no commercial development or no continuation of commercial development. So we feel that it wouldn't focus the town centre around the heart of the Fair Green. In the past 20 years, it's fair to say that previously Merton's town centres and previous plans were bigger and generally more linear. And the boundaries we're proposing are focused around the commercial aspects and focused around the commercial and community aspects. Now, there are lots of community uses in Cricket Green, and not having a town centre designation doesn't detract from them. I think we feel particularly because there's not really capacity in some of those areas to encourage the commercial growth you want to in town centres. So there's lots of open space protection, there's lots of historic environment protection, and if there wouldn't be the capacity there for the extra commercial development that people would expect to see in town centres. To the north, it's a bit trickier because, like many of London's town centres, the shops run away up main roads. It's quite common in big urban areas. And, you know, there is a debate as to exactly where you feel the boundary sets. So the council's proposing the boundary fairly tightly around the Fair Green and not extending too far north towards Figs Marsh, the park there, and other issues, but mainly because that's where the commercial development should focus. That's where the continuous primary shopping area is. And to make it bigger, it just doesn't work.
Okay, Mr. Byrne, you wanted to make some final points, and Ms. Butler will have the last right of reply before we move on.
Sure. Just on the is a village a planning consideration point? I mean, I think it's important to recognise the plan generally talks about Mitcham as a town centre, not as a district centre. So it's a district centre in London plan terms, but actually there are numerous references to Mitcham town centre, and that, in our view, is a misleading description of what Mitcham is. So it's not simply a matter of semantics. And I set out earlier why I believe it is a legitimate and meaningful planning consideration, and therefore not a matter simply of the sign that you see as you're welcomed, or the branding of the location. On the definition of the boundaries, I mean, I think if we've learnt anything in the last few years, we need to be thinking about these centres, be they village or town centres, as more than commercial and more than retail, and that their community offer and the range of reasons that people want to attract and to assemble and to connect and to feel part of something bigger goes beyond the retail experience. And that is why that blending of the retail provision, which is largely focused around what is being defined as the centre within the plan, and the civic and community functions, of course, the bits of both in both ends, as it were, need to be considered together. And to do otherwise is to, in a sense, to divide rather than to unite the community around a coherent geography known as Mitcham.
So we heard there, Ms. Butler, that there might be some inconsistency in the wording in terms of what Mitcham, the centre of Mitcham's referred to, whether it's district or town centre. So could that be an action point to review that and ensure that the wording's consistent on that particular point? I think the other thing is that we've heard both points of view on what the extent of the centre should be, and we've got the supporting documents from both Mitcham, Cricket Green and the council. So we've got those. We'll take those into account as the examination move forward, and of course we'll be doing site visits as well to that area, and you know, to see what things look like on the ground in those terms. But just with those as a final point on this, Ms. Butler, if you'd like to come back on any of those points.
Yes, just on the point about district centre, several places in the plan, including the glossary, we define district centres. There's a spelling mistake, I've just spotted two, which we'll fix, which defines the district centres as Colliers Wood, Mitcham and Morton. It defines it in the Mitcham policy, in the paragraph 1.2.54 of the growth strategy. And yes, in some places in the plan, we've used the word town centre. I think we were trying to turn some of the plan into non-planning speak, really, because while people in this room will understand the phrase district centre and major centre, most people just think of their nearest town centre. So we can check the plan for consistency, but I'm just explaining why town centre also features, trying to make it less technical, really, in some cases where it's appropriate to do so.
Okay, thank you. Moving on. Ms. Butler, we posed a question about policy TC 13.5 and instances where proposals for town centre type use is over 1,000 square metres in designated town centres. It talks about the council's regeneration objectives. Can you clarify where in the plan or other documents, such as SPD, for example, are these regeneration objectives identified? And would it be clear to decision makers or other users of the planning system what these are?
Yes, the council's objectives are, well, we consider the regeneration objectives as set out in chapter 1C of the plan, urban development objectives and vision. And the MPPF requires councils to designate town centre, to set town centre policy, but all having regard to the needs, but also making sure there's an element of flexibility to allow town centres to adapt over time. And that is a key part of the MPPF. I'm just trying to find the exact paragraph. It's about changing circumstances. One second. Yes. Sorry for the delay. MPPF paragraph 86 has A to F different criteria. And they set out what planning policies should do. And criterion A sets out that the council should define a network and hierarchy of town centres and promote their long-term vitality and viability by allowing them to grow and diversify in a way that can respond to rapid changes in the retail and leisure industries, allow a suitable mix of uses, including housing, and reflect their distinctive characters. And the reason that we have created a policy that allows the consideration of larger elements in some of Merton's local centres, where they meet the council's regeneration objectives, is to reflect the MPPF's desire for some element of flexibility. Particularly, the emphasis is on the rapid change in retail and leisure industries. And that's why we've left a clear statement to allow these types of things to be considered where they meet the council's good growth objectives.
Yeah, so that's understood now, Ms. Butler, but I think it's just that terminology, isn't it? If it's referring to the urban development objectives, and it's referring to that specific element of the plan, I think that add clarity and the effectiveness in terms of going to deal with any applications that come forward for that use.
We'll take that away, and we take your point about the word regeneration versus good growth.
Thank you. Okay, so moving on. We posed a question about what is meant by large increases in commercial floor space in relation to policy TC 13.5. If you could, Ms. Butler, please outline the proposed modification on this matter and how it would deal with any perceived townish issues, please.
Sorry, Inspector, is this in relation to Wimbledon Village? Or is this in relation to a different point? Sorry, Inspector, I think I've found the reference. Shall I?
Yeah, it's within the neighbourhood parades.
Thank you. Yes. The question you asked in the matters was, is policy TC 13.5 clear insofar as what's meant by large increases in commercial floor space in neighbourhood parades? And you went on to ask about whether this is expansion or development of uses or other matters. And as a result of reflecting on your questions, we would like to propose two connected main modifications. One to policy TC 13.5, where the heading is within neighbourhood parades. And that's to delete that proposal. And then there's a corresponding modification, 13.5.31, which adds a sentence to clarify that neighbourhood parades are not designated town centres, and as such, large increases will be resisted.
Thank you. But just to say, I won't ask around the table if there are any questions, but if you do have any points you wish to make on these, then please turn your nameplate up and we will spot it. Okay, the MIQs, Ms. Butler, included a question about the approach to betting shops, and MM is proposed. Hot food takeaways as well. And a main modification is proposed, MM 13.1, and at paragraph 10.86 of the council's hearing statement. Could you just explain the rationale for that MM, please?
Oh, thank you. I just start by the background that betting shops and in particular being a concern of residents, of businesses, of other businesses and of the council over a number of years. We've monitored them carefully with help of cross-party councillors in licensing and the Borough Plan Advisory Committee. I think it's fair to say that more recent monitoring shows a clear decline in their number, coinciding with the changes in the gambling regulations that removed the fixed odds betting terminals. So we are seeing a decreasing number of actual physical shops in the borough, and I think that's common across other London boroughs and nationally. We're proposing, having reflected on your question, we're proposing main modifications to policy TC 13.5 on page 154. And really that removes the betting shop function or new betting shops from the primary shopping area of Merton's town centres, because reflecting Mr. Breton's point, they're not compatible with the social and retail functions of town centres. So they're not considered appropriate new uses there.
Thank you. Okay, so moving on to policy TC 13.6. Sorry, Mr. Burton, you wanted to.
Yeah, apologies if I'm getting this out of order, but there were some questions you had for TC 13.5 related to neighbourhood parades.
Yes, of course.
Which
Yeah.
we haven't fully addressed.
Thank you, Mr. Burton. My apologies. There's some few other questions on that. Do you think it's sufficiently clear? For example, proposed criterion 3 does not appear to flow from the preamble. Is it justified? Perhaps as drafted, it looks like there would be nowhere in the borough that betting shops would be permitted. Is that a fair reading in the intention of the modified policy? Following on from that, would a blanket restriction accord with national policy? And then finally, how would hot food takeaways be considered following these proposed changes?
I'll deal with the betting. There's 2 points there. I understand the betting shops pointing a hot food takeaway point. We feel it's clear looking at document LBM05, which includes the proposed main modifications as track changes. We feel that policy TC 13.5 is clear that betting shops aren't considered acceptable in primary shopping areas of as new uses within the primary shopping areas of designated town centres. And that doesn't mean to say that if there are new betting shops, they couldn't take place outside the primary shopping area or in other places. Betting shops don't benefit from permitted development, so they would have to apply for planning permission to set up a new function, but that could be outside the primary shopping area of town centres.
To be considered on its merits.
Sorry, takeaways. I forgot the question about takeaways.
And that was how would the hot food takeaways be considered following these proposed changes?
Sorry for the pause. Policy TC 13.8, food and drink, leisure and entertainment, and policy 10.2, which is about health and well-being, contain the information on hot food takeaways, and particularly point you to policy TC 13.8, criteria F and G and H, which also cross-refer with health and well-being, which talk about an over-concentration of hot food takeaways. They talk about monitoring proposals for hot food takeaways found within 400 meters of a school, and they refer us to the requirements to comply with a healthy catering commitment standard for hot food takeaways.
Thank you. Mr. Burton, did you want to add anything else to the end of this discussion? Or we don't have any more questions.
Just on neighbourhood parades, I mean, the first of the questions you circulated ahead of time suggested there were some issues in the supporting text which might be better reflected in the policy, and I'd just say we broadly agree with that direction of travel. We think there's important things there, but it is important also that we have a clear and accurate definition of the neighbourhood parades in the borough, and in our view table 13.5b omits 3 important neighbourhood parades which are at least as important as some of the neighbourhood parades that have been included in it. So we've listed those in our evidence, but we think they're omissions, and we genuinely don't understand why the council hasn't included them, given it does include, for example, the neighbourhood parade at 55 to 59 Church Road, which has 3 units in it, all the neighbourhood parades that we have proposed on Bramcote Parade, a stretch of London Road between Mitcham Tram Stop and Cricket Green, which has 4 neighbourhood parades that aren't mentioned, one that is, and Monarch Parade opposite Mitcham Library. They all seem to us to be significant and important and should be listed.
Ms. Butler, do you have any views on that?
Yes, I mean, we have looked very carefully at all everybody's suggestions, but particularly Mitcham Cricket Green Community and Heritage. We've recommended a number of new neighbourhood parade. Well, I wouldn't say new, because I think in some cases they were protected in previous plans as neighbourhood parades. I think the important function for a local plan is to try and give clarity, certainty. And there is now lots of flexibility outside the planning system for what we can genuinely protect and what could change without recourse to this local plan. And our approach to neighbourhood parades has been that they need to be within ideally 400 meters so that people can, pick up a pint of milk or pick up some bread. They're designed for people who want to walk to a shop and don't have to or want to travel by car or bus or anything like that. Having a lot of